Welcome to New World Supernova. I'm Jade,
I'm Daniel.
and this is the One Piece Mega Theory as of chapter 956.
Yeah, sure is. So we were thinking from 9, was it 56 is the last one?
Yep.
So 55, as of 55 we saw and we were chatting around.
Cut up, sorry.
Ah.
I cut that up. 57 is the one that came out yesterday. 56 is...
Right. So we're chatting about 56 and we came up with this like massive theory of like
everything.
It's got so much in it. It could potentially just be like the next 2 years of One Piece, basically. And it's like to do with like all of the news that we got around Reverie.
Pretty much, it's about everything going forward. And I guess the best way to start this is kind of just jump heads in straight with what Morgans was saying and the 3 bits of news that we got from the last chapter. So, obviously, as of 9:56, Morgans says there's been a fatality. Big Obit sells paper, that's a fact. But the vote results are fantabulous too. And an attempted murder, thrilling stuff.
Yeah, so basically there's 3 points there, right? There's a death, so a fatality, as in a death. And then there's poll results, which we can pretty much assume is the results
of the warlords.
Exactly. So the warlords being abandoned and now being basically reinstated as like pirates. And then the attempted murder. So realistically, like we know what the poll results are. What people don't really necessarily know is who specifically died and who's the attempted murder.
So I think the safest way to talk about this going forward is realistically the attempted murder coming about at the Reverie. Obviously, there's a lot of political powers there and that, but the only ones that we really have significance of and would be significance or people of significance are sort of people that we've already been introduced to. And so going with that line of thinking and the rest of the stuff that's happened within the chapter, pretty much I think it's safe to assume that the results later on of people reacting to Sabo are insinuating that Sabo wasn't dead. So he's most likely not the fatality, but the reactions are that of someone that's done something against someone's character.
Yes.
So I feel like we both feel fairly comfortably that it's safe to assume that
Sabo is the attempted murder.
So who would he have attempted to murder? I guess is what we're going on here. And why is it specifically that he's not dead?
Yeah.
And so I guess the easiest way to kind of baseline establish why he's not dead is in the newest chapter, just cutting exactly to what the revolutionaries said. What is this? What does this mean? This can't be true. You're kidding, Sabo. This is the WEJ. That bird's lying through his beak. This is Sabo we're talking about. This is impossible. I won't believe a word of it. Our first step is to ascertain the truth. Sabo. Sabo-kun, please don't be true.
So it's definitely something that they like absolutely don't like believe to be true. It's not his death necessarily, because I feel like it would be less shock and it would be more mourning, right?
Yeah.
They wouldn't be like, why is this happening? How could this have happened? It would have just been like, oh no, like this is terrible.
This is also more apparent as well with Stella's reaction, where he's not questioning his brother's death. He's just questioning his brother having been there in present of Reverie. So, knowing that Sabo is not the death, essentially being safely confirmed here, the other possibility or way to look at it would be if Sabo was either captured by the Marines, which is very possible, but if he had been captured, the news wouldn't be just about Sabo from the revolutionaries. It would be talking about the revolutionaries and Morley, Karasu, and Lindbergh. It'd be a bit more broad spectrum than just Sabo. What's wrong with Sabo?
Yeah, exactly. So, like, if all 5 of them, 5, because he was with all 4 of the commanders?
It was him, Morley, Lindbergh, and Karasu, with Bello Betty staying back on Kamabaka Kingdom. Yeah,
so the 4 of them then, those 4 would have all been captured, right?
Yeah.
So, seemingly, it wouldn't necessarily be Sabo. So let's say it's an attempted murder, right? Let's just say that it actually happened. He actually attempted to murder some high-ranking government official. It wouldn't just be he attempted to murder them. It would be Sabo and 3 of the commanders. It would be Sabo and then all 3 of the
It'd
other
be
names
the revolutionary
attempted to murder.
commanders attempted
Exactly.
to murder an innocent civilian.
Yeah, so the news wouldn't be Sabo, how could you do this? It would be like, how could they have done this?
Now, that being said, there has been a lot of people throwing around the idea that it was an attempted murder on Kuma's life, the former warlord, because the government doesn't know that he's a revolutionary. That is somewhat possible, but again, it doesn't explain the reactions. If Sabo took mercy and decided to kill Kuma or anything like that, it would be Warlord of the Sea murdered, or Warlord of the Sea defeated a revolutionary, or assault from the revolutionaries on the warlords.
Yeah.
It's seemingly pretty clear and cut that it's about a death, an attempted murder. Sabo's the attempted murderer.
Mm-hmm.
And linking back to what Garp says at the beginning of the chapter, there has been an incident resulting around the Alabaster Kingdom.
Yeah.
And so, essentially, there's 2 lines of thinking if there's an attempted murder. Cobra or Vivi. And so, the way the chapter tries to lead you into thinking, it's Princess Vivi, with the way that Shirahoshi just instantly goes Vivi-sama. But it doesn't quite make sense for Vivi to be the target. Although she is potentially in cahoots with the pirates and that, and there is something else that I'll get to in a second, specifically pertaining to the possibility of it being Vivi, but for the most part, it's probably Cobra.
Yeah.
Being the kingdom, the
head of the
ruler.
kingdom, the leader of the family itself. Whereas Vivi's still young. She's still probably in her teens or early 20s.
I think she's 16, 17 or 19.
Yeah, so she's still very, very impressionable, right? And so someone like the entire power of the world government can pretty much just like enslave her and get her to do whatever she wants.
Fairly
Exactly.
easily. Whereas
So,
Cobra,
they could pretty well just kill her dad and then say, you have to do anything that we say, and then she will. Because she's still young.
This links back as well to just after Zoe, when everyone was heading to the Reverie. We had Cobra strictly coming up and pretty much saying, I'm going to go to Reverie this year. Whether hell comes in my way, I will make it to Reverie. I have to ask the Gorosei and the world government about what's been on my mind for the past 2 years, and that's the poneglyphs.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as of chapter 908, we pretty much have the Gorosei talking about a light that they need to extinguish.
Yeah.
And so, that light is seemingly pretty clearly the Kingdom of Alabaster.
Yeah. So they were basically talking about some sort of purge, like within their ranks. And they were talking about, and it did seemingly imply very heavily that it was within their ranks. It wasn't necessarily like, oh, we need to purge the pirates, or we need to like purge the revolutionaries. Like we finally know where they are, and we need to take them out.
cut the dead ends.
Exactly. It was seemingly like we have some like kind of poison in our ranks that we need to take out. And obviously, the person that you immediately think of there is Vivi and Cobra, because they are both pre-celestial dragons, like high class nobility.
They're the
who have
20
left.
founding kingdoms.
Exactly. And they've left, and they've now founded their own kingdom, separate. Well, they're still somewhat involved with the world government, but they're not any longer one of those top like celestial dragons that keep slaves and whatnot. They're very defiant towards that. And on top of that, they had the whole issue, especially around the warlords, which is very well connected to this reverie proceeding, is they had that big issue with Crocodile and the warlords. And so there's obviously a huge amount of upset, and that upset obviously hurt the world government. So it's not too far-fetched that the world government would have like a pretty big like distaste for them for kind of having that upset in general, even if it wasn't necessarily within their hands.
To the point that the Gorosei even called them traitors in chapter 908.
Exactly.
So, but essentially, definitively saying now, Sabo isn't dead. He's attempting the murder or being blamed for the attempted murder of Cobra. That leaves a bit of a question of Sabo's fate, which is still up in the air at the moment, which I feel like is done on purpose.
Yeah.
Whether it is genuinely up in the air, or if it is somewhat of a guise to bring Dragon out of hiding.
We don't know whether he escaped or got captured, but we do know that he's the only person being framed, and all the other people there with him at the time aren't being framed. So theoretically, that would tell me that he has indeed been captured, yet the other people got away, because the other people haven't seemingly got an execution or anything like that, or they haven't been blamed in cahoots with him, he's the only one being blamed. So what the world government wants to say is not that the revolutionaries managed to get 4 men into the proceeding to attack, but only one of them slipped in. He was dealt with immediately, and he's evil because he attempted to murder this one person, which loses trust for the revolutionaries, which is extremely harmful to the revolutionaries thing, which is another big reason why all the revs really didn't like the fact that it happened, right? And obviously it's super out of character for Sabo to do that because, like, there's no reason to attack the leaders of Alabasta.
Which would cause Dragon to have to do what he says in this chapter, where we need to confirm this.
Exactly.
And that would lead more into the thinking as well that whether Dragon believes Sabo attempted to murder, or because he was clashing previously with admirals, accidentally got a kingdom involved in the conflict, there is something there that Dragon does need to check out because he thinks that Sabo is involved, which is what the news is reporting.
And he generally needs to have control of the situation, right? Because if you think about it, like, let's say the revolutionaries are like a lot more powerful than we think they are, which they probably are, right? They probably have quite a few countries that will, like, on the low, say that they're allied with them, right? Like, they don't necessarily like the world government. They're still paying tax and whatnot to the world government, but they're on the low kind of would join the revolutionaries if a massive coup were to happen, right? So all of these people would now drop off their allegiances if one of their right-hand man would have randomly just kill like a really good person that lots of the other kingdom leaders know.
It's no different to if Garp or Sengoku went out to a random country, snapped the neck of the ruler, and then just walked off like nothing happened.
Exactly. Akeunu would immediately be like, okay, we need to get this person, we need to find out what the hell is going on, and we need to question him, and if he is a traitor, and if he did do that out of nowhere, we have to punish him, because if we don't punish him, all the other leaders will just lose faith in us. So Dragon's the same way, right? Like, his allegiance is probably very delicate, right? Because it's scary going against the world government.
People already don't want to ally with him because they're scared.
Yeah, and so if something like that happens where someone's just going around killing people, then Dragon needs to either get Sabo and figure out if it actually happened, in which case punish him publicly so that all the other leaders know, okay, well, at least Dragon's not an evil prick. Or the other way around, just find out that it's not true in general.
Now, if Sabo is being blamed for the murder of Cobra, that leaves Vivi in a very delicate spot where she's either going to pick up the mantle or has a big question mark about what's going on with her character in the future. Now, this is where the last little scene with Big News Morgans comes into play, where he says he's getting a call from Wapple. And so the reason why this could be very delicate is because regarding the situation at the moment and the position that Vivi is in, and depending on whether or not Wapple holds a grudge against Vivi, I'd like to remind everyone that Vivi was present on the Straw Hat crew when they went to Drum Island and they overthrew Wapple as king. So imagine the delicate situation they're in now, where King Cobra has essentially stood before all the kings, said, pirates are bad, they destroyed my country, please don't make pirating legal, get rid of all the pirates, just to find out that in the eyes of the government and the eyes of the world, if this is what happened and what Wapple presented, is that his daughter, who also stood by his side, essentially saying pirates are bad, had allied with a pirate previously. Even though we know it's a good pirate, from the point of the world government, it's extra ammunition to go, we're justified if we're killing this person because they're a bad bloodline and they're a bad thing to have and dead weight inside this. But that being said, that's not just where the potential end is for the Gorosei, as seemingly from the beginning to the end of this reverie, there has been a lot of things that have been going on. And so,
one thing before we move on was I wanted to mention that with Wapple, it's very important to know that you assume that Big News Morgans has the 100% correct information, because you saw that scene where he literally kills, or at least beats the hell out of, a CP0 member just for trying to stop him from putting out the absolute truth, right? However, after that happened, so you can pretty safely assume that all the information that he has there, he, as a very reliable source, believes 100% for everything to be true. However, after that, he gets a call from Wapple, who again is really not liking Vivi, he gets a call from Wapple saying that he has lots of information regarding the proceedings, and then that's where you cut away from the scene. So you don't actually know what Wapple said, and so the newspaper that actually came out is whatever came out after Wapple had his influence in talking to Morgans. So Wapple could have definitely said something very counter intuitive to what the news was before that, the news that the world government actually wanted to hide. Wapple could have said the complete opposite, and then Big News could have believed it and put that news out instead of what he believed before.
Alternatively, the news that Garb is talking about could be something as simple as no one tried to assassinate anyone from Alabaster yet, but since the news has come out, maybe Wapple had been manipulated by the Gorosei to come forward about VV being related with pirates and essentially use that as an excuse to purge Alabaster from the ranks of the world government.
Yeah.
Now, going forward with the Gorosei again, is essentially the last time we cut to the reverie was between chapters 903 and 908. And so one of the major interactions there to come out of it was the big wow factor of Shanks and what the hell Shanks was doing at the reverie, meeting the Gorosei, how out of left field it is, what's a pirate doing here. A lot of people throwing around that Shanks could be a celestial dragon or this or that. And to me, it is very evident that he's only there to do what he's talking about, and he was directly saying, I'm here to talk about a pirate. I'm here to talk about a general threat. We don't know what that threat is. We don't know what that threat is pertaining to. However, from the last few times we've cut to the reverie since Wano has begun, the only plot point around the reverie that we haven't addressed is seemingly to do with Blackbeard.
Yeah.
And so, seemingly, if we're talking about a coherent narrative, if you have within the reverie multiple plot lines going on, the plot lines are the abolishment of the warlord system, the purging of the Alabaster Kingdom, and Blackbeard and his relevance. And so, if that is the case, and that is the general thinking, Shanks is presumably going there to warn the Gorosei about Blackbeard pirates and Blackbeard himself.
Yes.
Assuming that is true, that arises the potential that Shanks is going there because at this point in time he has pertained some form of knowledge that other people do not have. There's the potential, again, from this chapter, 956, that we see Blackbeard start to move out. And so what he directly says when he's starting to leave is, pack your bags onto the ship. If the Navy's only going to take it, I might as well claim the prize. And so, in refrains to this chapter, that quote from Blackbeard is seemingly pertaining to either the death, the poll results, or the attempted murder. It's something related to the news.
Yes, it's something that's happening within this news. And so, because that's, as far as we know, that's the only source of information that he has, right? He won't have some kind of inside man in any other place. It's seemingly that he's reading the newspaper and he's making a decision based on the reverie results. Hence it jumped right from the reverie, the newspaper story, right to Blackbeard. So what he's going after is obviously something that he wants, and it's obviously something that the Navy is involved in. So the only thing currently that we know that the Navy is involved in, the actual Marines themselves, is the hunting down of each individual warlord. So potentially it could be an ancient weapon, it could be a fruit, maybe a fruit of one of the warlords.
It could be the fruit of Sabo if they're saying that Sabo is dead. However, like we were saying before, the news is mostly implying that he is not dead. And if he is captured, it seems like a lot of effort for Blackbeard to invade Merijoa
just for the flame fruit.
Something that he sent Burgess after, so it obviously wasn't a high priority for him.
If it was such a massive priority for him, he would have taken his entire fleet and gone and just completely nuked Dressrosa and gotten the fruit. He would have just wiped Dofi off the face of the earth and just taken the fruit. Like, nothing would have stopped him from doing that, because he himself, as a Yonko with an entire crew, is essentially equal to a Buster Call, which could just basically wipe out any island.
That being said as well, it is very specific that he says it.
Yes.
Implying not a person, but an object.
Yes.
So it's seemingly he's not going to recruit the warlords in the way that some people assumed from the unofficial translations.
Yes.
But it's an actual object.
Yes.
So it could be something pertaining to the Alabaster Kingdom, like an ancient weapon and that. However, it seemingly wouldn't make sense for that to have been published in the newspaper.
100%. That would be like 100% hush hush. It wouldn't be one low level CP0 member coming to stop it. If it was that, it would be a matter of like actual like
There'd be
international
an admiral
news.
there. There'd be CP0 there. The
It would
place
be
would be
like-
surrounded.
It would be an entire team of like the top tier CP0, like anyone who's not currently undercover, who's like got absolute perfect mastery of say the 5 powers, would be right there, and they would basically just like be holding everyone with a bloody finger pistol to their neck, just saying you're not moving, you're not publishing this, or we will kill all of you. That would be like massive news, right? Because then every pirate in the entire sea would go after it, because it's been heralded as these 3 great weapons could just like destroy entire continents immediately, and just like having one of these could like ideally put you on like Yonko level despite being just like some random plebeian pirate.
So, despite all that, I'm just going to take the initiative here and put a smaller theory out about this and say that is there the potential that Shanks, having pre-thought out, understood, or had predicted Blackbeard's goals throughout the story, and has set into motion a plan to get Blackbeard to move prematurely? And has he gone and talked to the Gorosei about potentially putting out the news pertaining to something to get Blackbeard to move prematurely, with Blackbeard thinking that he is going to obtain a power in the hopes to entrap Blackbeard?
Yeah.
And so there is a high potential for this, but we will potentially come back to this in a bit. I feel like now the next thing to move on to is skipping out of the events of the Reverie, is going back to the self-contained island of Wano at the moment.
Yes.
And so essentially the main thing about Wano at the moment is the Alliance.
Yeah.
And the only thing going into Act 3 at this point in time that we genuinely have to question is, who is the traitor?
100%. Because it's been hinted that there's a traitor. There has to be a traitor because there's so much information being shown, right? So what we know about what the traitor's done is the traitor has basically given away the location of Zoe, because there was no other way that they could have found Zoe. Some theories that they have a mink on their team that knows the location of Zoe. However, Zoe is constantly moving. So there's no real way to get to Zoe unless you have a reverie card or you just accidentally come upon it.
And that can be explained away in a few other ways as well. We know that Hawkins is a member of the 100 Beast Pirates, or the Beast Pirates, Animal Kingdom Pirates, whatever you want to call them. Hawkins is a member. Hawkins' right-hand man is a mink named Force. So it is very, very likely that no matter who the traitor is, they would have had access to Zoe one way or another. The only problem is whether or not they had access to Zoe or not comes down to why they would want to go to Zoe.
Exactly.
Why they would want to access Zoe.
They knew immediately as they went there, and they were well prepared to nuke the entire country with poison gas if they didn't get their way, which they did, that Raizo was there. They knew specifically that Raizo was there. So the fact that they knew that Raizo was there would tell you that they knew that at least him, but more likely all 3 of the people that were there,
Raizo, Kinemon, Kanjuro,
all 3 of them went to Zoe in order to seek out, most likely, they could assume very easily, that they were to seek out the mink leaders.
Now, this is very important as well, because the reason, and I'm going to start just talking about all the scabbards now, and ticking them off as to why they could not be, or why one would not be the traitor. And essentially, if Raizo's the traitor, it doesn't make sense. If Jack is following Raizo's Vivre card there, then there would have been no need for him to stop and talk to the people. He could have just walked through the country until he physically found Raizo.
Yeah, it would have just been a matter of if Raizo had a Vivre card on him himself, it wouldn't be where is Raizo, he's not here. It would be I know he's here, I'm just going to kill all of you on my way to Raizo. It wouldn't be a matter of I need to question you to find out where he is. It'd just be a matter of I need to get past you. I just need to kill you and keep going, which wasn't necessarily a thing. It was seemingly like Jack wasn't necessarily trying to just like insta-kill both the mink leaders. He was basically just fighting them as he was saying, all of your people are dying, everyone's getting tortured, you need to tell us where he is, and then trying to break their wills and trying to assess information. Otherwise, it would have been probably, knowing that both of those 2 people were there, it probably would have been more than just Jack that went. Maybe just a larger army, maybe not like more commanders, maybe one of the 6 flying fighters or something like that, just to kind of tip the scales, and they would have just basically just wiped over the entire of Zoe, killed all of them, and then gotten to Raizo, because Raizo was on their team. So it could not have possibly been Raizo, because they actually stayed and questioned.
So it also doesn't make sense for it to be Kinemon, essentially just for the simple fact that Kinemon is essentially the main protagonist of the Scabbards.
Yeah.
He is essentially null and void to being the betrayer, because if he really wanted to betray, when he was on his own with Momonosuke, he could have killed him without anyone questioning him.
Yeah, and then if Momonosuke is dead, they have no rebellion. So, like, you saw, when they first saw Momonosuke, and all of the samurai were, like, broken, and they were like, we are not going to do it. We've already tried while you guys were gone for the 20 years, and we absolutely failed. There is absolutely no chance that we can do it. I know that we have this Luffy guy, and he's really, really strong, but there's no chance that we can beat Kaido and all of his men. But then they saw the heir, essentially, the Kazuki heir, and they got all of their hope back, right? So if Kinemon just killed him as soon as he had the chance to, just chopped him in the head,
it would have made more sense. They
Yeah,
would have crushed
100%.
rebellion then and there.
no rebellion would ever even start, let alone be able to win.
So the next person I will talk about is Shuten-Maru, and the reason Shuten-Maru doesn't fit to be the traitor is the same reason why the other samurai don't seem to be the traitors. Not the scabbards, just in general, a generalized samurai.
Yeah.
Because he's essentially been broken-willed. He's the voice of the people at the moment, in the sense that you've been gone for 20 years.
Yeah.
We're not going to just come back and instantly follow you. We need hope. We need a reason to fight.
Out of virtually every single one of the scabbards, he is the least motivated to have the rebellion go. But there's no way that he would ever do the betrayal because of that fact. Like he just wants everyone to just lay low and just hide, and that's it.
And so then we move to Kawamatsu. And so it doesn't make sense for Kawamatsu to be the betrayer because he's been in prison for 13 years. It just doesn't fit. Timeline-wise, it makes no sense for him to be the betrayer.
And there's no reason that he could teach Luffy that haki, because like if he was teaching Luffy that haki, like
that was Old Man Hyo. But even Kawamatsu being there, he wouldn't have been trying to encourage the progression of the raid.
Yeah.
So if it's not Shuten-Maru, if it's not Kawamatsu, if it's not Raizo, and if it's not Kinemon, there's only a few people left.
Yeah. So the vast majority of the scabbards, so like Nekomamushi and Inarashi, things like that, the older ones, the ones that didn't go back in time, there's no way that they would ever do it, right? Because they didn't even know, they wouldn't be able to say, oh, they're back from, 20 years in the past, and they're now headed to Zou, because they didn't know whether they came back, because they were all in different locations doing their own things.
They questioned it as well. You see Shuten-Maru, he didn't necessarily even believe anymore that they would come back. His faith wavered, and the same could be said for the Minks.
Exactly.
So the only people left, essentially, are Kanjuro, and I know a lot of people are out there saying, oh, it's Kanjuro, he's definitely the betrayer, he draws terribly, specifically to get them destroyed. He sabotages them at every twist and turn. I do not think it is Kanjuro. The reason I do not think it is Kanjuro is because, for starters, he was imprisoned by Doflamingo, and I would like to point out, going back to the beginning here, and this very, very, very heavily pretty much confirms who the traitor is, and that is when the scabbards, when Kinemon, Raizo, and Kanjuro left Wano, they were spotted leaving the shores. So someone noticed them leaving the shores. After that point, they split from Raizo. Raizo made it to Zou, and the other two made it to Dressrosa. At Dressrosa, they were correctly identified by Doflamingo and Doflamingo's family and subordinates.
Mm-hmm.
For that to have happened, Doflamingo would have had to need some form of former acknowledgement. So, for that to have happened, his superior Kaido would have had to have some form of former knowledge. That coming from the traitor.
Yep.
Now, if it did come from the traitor, there is a possibility of it to be Denjiro, but we know nothing about Denjiro at the moment. If it was Kanjuro...
Denjiro, by the way, being the guy that we haven't met yet. The only retainer that we haven't necessarily identified.
Now, Kanjuro, being freed from the prisoner, seeing the minks and everything that happened at Zou, we've seen him genuinely express sympathy and emotion. We've seen him very empathetic. And so, pretty much, the only person left to talk about is the person that I genuinely feel like is all but confirmed to be the traitor, Okiku.
100%.
So Okiku, in the perspective of the timeline, was sent forward in time with the other retainers when Kozuki Oden's castle burned down. And essentially, while the other three left the country, she was left to gather information of the current state in Wano. She's the only person that for an extended period of time doesn't have her movements in check.
Yep.
She's the only person without an alibi outside of Denjiro. And the point of there being a traitor within the alliance is that it'll be someone somewhat meaningful. It'll be someone that we genuinely go, wow, there was a traitor in our midst.
Exactly. It has to be someone that you trust and that you generally believe to be like a good person.
The reason
Okiku fits this extremely well because she's literally taking care of a little girl and she's very nice and she smiles. You can see in that photo.
Or he, depending on how that goes.
Yeah. And so generally, like, Okiku is like the perfect traitor, quote unquote, because it's someone that you wouldn't necessarily suspect unless you really think super hard about all the tiny little details of who it could be. And it's someone that could just jump out at you and go, oh, her, but she was really nice, or he.
And the reason why it's not Denjiro, the person we haven't met yet, is because, plain and simply, they're leaking information currently only known to the Alliance.
Yeah.
And so, the best example is Hiyori's whereabouts at the end of Act 2.
Yep.
And to have that knowledge known, it's either Zoro or Kawamatsu if that knowledge wasn't explained to the rest of the scabbards.
Mm-hmm.
And if it was explained to the rest of the scabbards,
it had to be one of the scabbards.
And so, seeing as how all the other scabbards have had genuine major emotional moments, the only one that hasn't is Okiku. The best example of this is when Lord Yasui died. We got to see everyone's individual reactions. And
everyone was bawling.
And although Okiku never actually physically saw the execution, that could have also have been just to avoid the fact that she would have been void of motion if she is the traitor.
Yeah.
She was with the Straw Hats going to the prison. She was essentially surveying the situation. She didn't actually pick up a weapon and start fighting until she was kind of coerced into it by Old Man Hyo after the jailbreak.
Mm-hmm.
She was just observing and taking information. And essentially, that is the best reason for her to have been the traitor.
100%.
So, with Okiku being the traitor then, and that done and dusted, the next thing to move on to from 956...
We're getting into the meat of our main theory that we have.
So let's just put all the cards on the table. I'm going to just come out and say, we feel like we confidently know whose sword is, what sword is,
what their goal is,
sword's motives, and we're going to go through and explain the difference between sword, CP0, and essentially everything
the
going
general
forward.
Marines outside of sword.
And so
their role as like a hidden organization.
So I'm going to take us back now to the beginning of Act 2 of Wano and essentially bring up something that became very relevant this chapter, and that is CP0's actions in Wano and what they were doing. They were there specifically to buy weapons from the people of Wano. A few chapters before we actually saw them interacting with Orochi, it is still technically the same day in canon timeline of the story. Mm-hmm. We have Shinobu and Nami spying on the weapons port. The weapons merchant specifically says, wow, there is enough weapons here to start a war. I don't know what's going on overseas. Are they having a war? It's enough weapons to spur an army.
So this is so many weapons that it could feed an entire army and supply an entire war. So that would be main troops plus reinforcements, the whole lot, right? Like an entire war. Not a battle, like not, 100 men or 1,000 men. It's a war. So this is basically the entire amount of weapons that an entire country would have, or an entire naval force would have for an entire war.
Now, with what we know at the moment, there aren't enough people in CP0 to genuinely have enough people for an army, for a war.
Not at all. The whole point of CP0 is that they're an underground organization, and they're hidden, and you know very little of their actual who's who, and they wear masks, and they're hidden, and you don't know their powers. They are generally undercover, like as you saw with Stussy. So Stussy is essentially the underground prostitute ring. So but then it turns out that she's a CP0 member. However, she was right under Big Mom. Obviously there for knowledge, basically, right? Who in the world is in the underground ring? If you're in the underground ring and you are respected in the underground ring, you get to know everybody else in the underground ring. So you'll know things like Joker or Dofi, and you'll know his dealings. So you'll know about the smiles, and you'll know who he gets the smiles from. So you'll know about Kaido, and you'll know that Kaido does the smiles. Therefore, you'll know that Kaido's goal is to give all of his men smile users, and that's how they know about that entire plot. Otherwise, because Wano's completely disconnected from every other place, they would have no access to that information whatsoever. So it's obvious that they have all these people in regards to just underground CP0 members. They don't have a fighting force. As of yet, there's never been displayed like a CP0 like warriors ring or like, CP Marines or anything like that.
So they're getting enough arms to supply a war. Why would they? The only people that really actually can give CP0 orders outside of CP0 itself is the Celestial Dragons, but it doesn't make sense for them to be preparing for a war because they're not fighters. It's redundant.
Yeah.
The only other person that we know of in the story that has the ability to command CP0 is Kong. And so the only reason Kong would be gearing up weapons for a war, or potentially, and this is a very important thing, because we're talking about Wano and Wano weapons in specific, what are the state of these weapons? Are they high tier weapons, or is it something more along the lines of Sea Prism Stone weapons? Different cuts and makes of sea stone.
So what's important there is that Wano is obviously a country full of like mad weaponsmiths, right? But it's not just the fact that they have really good craftsmanship. It's the fact that most of the sea stone in the world is around Wano, and they have access to sea stone bullets,
their abundance.
Sea stone weapons, things like that. Generally speaking, if you're going to get sea stone bullets, you're going to get it from Wano or from someone who got it from Wano. So if you're one of those sneaky people who are buying sea stone weapons, you're generally getting it from Wano or whoever they source their weapons out to. So it's a very good likelihood that that's Wano. The other instance is the other craftsmanship that they have. So we know that one of the clans that was in Wano created all the poneglyphs. So there's potential with like god tier craftsmanship that you can't get anywhere else. So maybe it's not even necessarily a specific material, but it's just like a way of creating something, maybe blending Haki into it. We know now that they have black blade masters that live in Wano that create black blades, and it's a pretty good assumption that Wano's probably like the main hub of the craftsmen that actually made black blades in the world. So you have the potential for sea stone weapons, you have the potential for high grade weapons that you couldn't get anywhere else, and you have the potential as well for just a different type of wood, different type of metal. So we've had like the drunken metal,
drunken ore,
exactly, things like that. So it could potentially just be a harder version of the metal, similar to what you see in Marineford in those massive
the Wapple metal plates that
exactly.
go around to defend against Whitebeard's quakes.
Exactly.
So essentially, whether or not they're just higher tier generalized weapons or if they're Sea Prism Stone weapons, CP0 is trying to gather enough weapons to supply something. So this brings us to our next point.
What war are they fighting?
And separate to that, who are they arming? This comes to something very important that was introduced seemingly in this chapter, and that is sword. We have Rear Admiral Kobe, former Rear Admiral X Drake, Drake the Supernova, the pirate, the guy on Kaido's crew,
undercover
as a government official.
In a high position, mind you, in one of the 6 fighters. Now, what we know about Kaido's rankings is that there are 3 what people call calamities, or just 3 basically commanders. There's King, Queen, and Jack. So they're all the cards, right? So Kaido being the top tier, then you have King, Queen, Jack, right? As of right now, we don't know about Ace, because depending on the card game that's involved, Ace could be either the highest card or the lowest card.
We have Joker in the form of Doflamingo being the underground broker.
Exactly.
Kaido's cards theme is his crew.
Exactly. So what we have right now is we have all of like the royalty cards, right? King, Queen, Jack. We also have Joker as a little side thing. Ace could potentially even be Okiku or the traitor of some form, right? The ace up your sleeve. Yep. So even though it's only a 1 point, so it's not necessarily that strong, it's still your ace. Now, here's the thing. Is they've recently released the numbers. So they called in all of the numbers. Now, the numbers likely going from 1 to 10. Potentially, probably 2 to 10, because number 1 is Ace. However, you have Page 1, who we can very well assume is part of the numbers. And then we've seen some of the other people.
Going into this more specifically,
Yeah.
the numbers and the flying six are seemingly separate,
Yes.
but they could still all hold the same rank from the numbers 1 through 10.
Yes.
So you could have, we saw 5 of the quote-unquote numbers when we were seeing the end of Onigashima.
And they all looked like some kind of giants or some kind of ancient form. So whether or not they were all Zoans, or only some of them were Zoans, or some of them were different type of ancient giants, similar to what Oz is, they all seem to be that kind of ancient theming that is very prevalent within the Flying Six so far, being the 2 dinosaurs that we know of.
So it seems like almost from a scale of 0 to 10 or 1 to 10, you can break it up into the upper half being the numbers, the lower half being the Flying Six, the back half of those troops.
And that would be evident by the fact that when we saw the numbers in that little silhouette that we saw, every single one of those numbers were massive, and they looked really menacing, and they were supposed to look really menacing because theoretically they're extremely powerful. So likely those numbers could actually be those top 5, because we didn't see, I think we only saw 5.
We only saw 5.
Yeah, so those 5 could be the top 5 numbers. So maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, something like that.
The Flying Six.
Exactly. So then we have, so 1 through 6 potentially. Flying Six.
Or 6 through 10
Yeah.
in the lower echelons of the cards, depending on how you want to flip it upside its head in the number ranking or scaling for the crew.
Yeah.
Now, pretty much, I feel like the big thing that we need to talk about now is, since we're talking about Sword, the introduction to Sword, Drake being a member of Sword, surprisingly enough to some, not surprising to others, but mostly surprising to me, Kobe being a member of Sword, Kobe being a Rear Admiral, and it's seemingly being told to us that Kobe is Drake's handler.
Exactly. So seemingly, right, Kobe is still, let's assume right now that Sword is a hidden underground version of the Marines, right? So it's completely separate to the actual general Marines, like the public face of the Marines. Potentially,
it's a splinter cell.
Exactly. And potentially, this part of the Marines is being completely and entirely hidden from Im, the Gorosei, all the Celestial Dragons, and the CP agencies. So seemingly, the Marines is something that's headed entirely by the Marines, but it's hidden from the public face of the Marines. And so basically what we have here is we have Kobe as the quote-unquote handler of the undercover agent, Drake. And Kobe is still going along with general Marine business. So he's still just working under Garp, training under Garp. He's a Rear Admiral now. He went to the Reverie and protected people during to arrive to the Reverie. Now he's going after Boa, as we saw. So he's generally not necessarily doing sword work himself, because he's maintaining the face of just being a general Marine.
So that being said, right, we can quite safely break this up into the way that they've been explained in the series, where the face of the world government are the Marines. The body of the world government are the CP agencies, 1 through 8, with 9 being a secret intelligence agency. CP0 is CP-AG0. It is literally Greek for shield.
So Aegis is the Greek word for shield, right?
So we have Sword and Shield, the fighting force of the world government.
Yes. So essentially what we have here is we have the world government owns a splinter cell organization, in a sense, or an underground organization called SHIELD, right? Meanwhile, you have what is seemingly composed of only people that are involved in the Marines and not necessarily the world government itself, who are a part of an underground organization called the Sword, directly opposing the SHIELD.
Talking about CP0 here, CP0's whole thing is being shields to defend the Celestial Dragons and do the bidding of the Celestial Dragons, essentially. They are the protection for the higher-ups. They actively go out of their way doing things for the Celestial Dragons to protect them. So, if the goal of the Celestial Dragons and the goal of CP0 is to protect, the goal of Sword is to somewhat attack. Attack what? Well, seemingly from what we can infer from this chapter, the Yonko.
100%.
They are infiltrating pirates.
Yeah. So all that we've seen currently, out of this Sword agency that we've seen, is we've seen 2 members that we have 100% confirmed, which is Drake and Kobe. So Kobe being the handler, in a sense, under Drake, being underground in Kaido's crew. So seemingly him having that specific fruit, going for that specific Yonko, he obviously wanted to get under him. He left the Marines, being a rear admiral, and became a pirate, got a big became a supernova, essentially, got a big bounty, probably did some things that he's not proud of.
Whether or not it was fabricated or real is up to the question. However, the fact is, he went out of his way to seek Kaido. As soon as the Marineford ended, he went out of his way to go to one of Kaido's favourite islands, attack Kaido's members. He was actively trying to infiltrate. And so, from what we can understand with that, using Drake as the only example for the moment, the goal of Sword is to infiltrate
the Yonko.
Whether that is to infiltrate and do nothing other than gather information, or infiltrate and take down from the inside. However, this then stems to the polar opposite of Sword being Shield.
And what is their goal? CP0.
CP0's goal is to take down the Revolutionary Army. Their entire plot point in the story is to protect the Celestial Dragons from the people aiming to overthrow the Celestial Dragons.
It's a very common observation that although the world government and the Navy are supposedly working together in tandem, generally speaking, the CP agency's main goal is always to verse the revolutionaries. The revolutionaries' main goal is always to verse the CP agencies. And then vice versa, the Marines are almost definitely hunting down all pirates, while the pirates generally are fighting back against the Marines. So seemingly, you have two separate wars going through two different agencies. Now, the revolutionaries and the pirates aren't necessarily friends, but obviously the world government and the Marines, at least at face value, are allied. And so basically what you have is you have the Shield fighting the Revolutionary Army, the Revolutionary Army actually intending to overthrow
the Celestial Dragons.
The Celestial Dragons. Therefore, they are the shield of the
Celestial Dragons.
Yeah, the revolution. Whereas you have your Sword, which is actively trying to attack the Yonko because the Yonko has claimed territory that the world government obviously wants in order to stop the Yonko.
It's a battle on
so
two
the
fronts.
Sword is offensive, while the Shield is defensive.
It's a battle on two fronts. And so, now that we can somewhat surmise the goal of Sword, who are the members of Sword? Who do we think are part of Sword? Who are Sword's members? And I feel like everyone and their dog's mother has already pointed to the beginning of chapter 592, Akainu.
100%. So if you look in this photo in Akainu, on his right shoulder, he's got a shield tattoo.
A sword
tattoo. So basically, it's very ominous that he would have a specifically sword tattoo. Because if you look at his left shoulder, he has a massive sleeve that goes down half of his torso and down 3/4 of his arm.
Having sakura petals and is seemingly just nothing to do with anything else.
Exactly. Basically just a general tattoo that kind of gives him a bit of theming. Then on his right shoulder, not attached to any kind of sleeve, nothing, just a symbol itself, a sword.
So this is where it gets very, very rocky as well, because now we're into the heavy speculation part, and I'm sure, like I just said, everyone is pretty much surmising that Akainu is a member of Sword because of the tattoo, and it's all because of the tattoo that Akainu is a member of Sword.
And Akainu is also potentially even, if not Kong, the leader of Sword. Now, you've seen Akainu constantly clashing with the CP0 and the Gorosei, constantly clashing with the world government. He flares up all the time against them. They don't really like him at all. They don't really respect him, and he thinks they're very ignorant. He's very go-getting, and they're very reserved. It's very different, right? It's very representative of the Shield and the Sword, their relationship together. So Akainu obviously doesn't necessarily trust the world government as much, because he just kind of thinks that he can do it on his own, right? He moved the headquarters of the Marines into the New World for a specific purpose, right? His goal is to get into the New World and sort all of that mess out, rather than sitting back like the CP agencies seemingly just don't really care if he does. Under Sengoku's rule, he wants to go on the offensive. He wants to be the Sword, and so he moves in. He's obviously very tenacious based on his theming. He's magma. He's very tenacious. You see meetings with him in different films and things like that, where he's got a flaming fist, or he just turns a part of his body into magma, or things around him start catching on fire as he's having a heated conversation with someone. He's very aggressive, and so it's not very far-fetched to think that he would want to actively take down all of the pirates.
So, okay, first thing we've got to address here is, because of the personality clash, we know that Toby's a part of the Marines, right? last thing we kind of had between Kobe and Akainu, and it just needs to be addressed and put out there, is Akainu essentially was, I'm going to kill you for deserting your post in Marineford War.
Mm-hmm.
So why the hell would Akainu continue to let Kobe be included in Sword if Akainu is the leader of Sword? And I feel like it's quite simple and very out in the open. You can see it in as simple as Akainu's interactions with Fujitora. The Marines all share the common belief that they want to protect people.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not they have different ideologies past that, their whole thing is they want to protect people.
Mm-hmm.
They don't necessarily hold grudges against each other for the most part, because they want to do the job of protecting and getting rid of the threats that put citizens in harm's way.
Mm-hmm.
So Akainu most likely does not hold a grudge long-lasting against Kobe for what he did in Marineford. In fact, he probably just doesn't care about it enough. Same thing with Kobe. Kobe probably just views it as, I was potentially a deserter to an extent in the war. I did, and I stood up for what I believe in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that Sengoku gave the cease and desist order, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
We all have our own personalities, and in a situation like that, we need to keep moving forward. So, pretty much the next part that we're going to be talking about now is, what other members do we think were a part of Sword outside of Akainu? And to come to this conclusion, there is a bit of a sidetrack, but I'm just going to straight up say, I believe there are at least a few members that we can point to and comfortably say they are members of Sword. And that is Yamakiji, Momonga, Strawberry, Doberman, and Onigumo. And so the reason why I think these people are members of Sword is because, and it's going to go on a bit of a tangent here, but seemingly we have actually had these people leading a charge with
Under
people
the guise of Sword.
under the guise of Sword previously in the story. We just didn't know it was under the guise of Sword until we've had the introduction of Sword. So when did this happen? Why do we think this? To do that, we're pretty much going to have to go on a little bit of a tangent and talk about Film Z.
Now, we want to stress right away at the start that we are well aware that Film Z is not canon, and we are not in any way trying to say that it is canon. However, you have to recognize that it was written by Oda, directed by Oda. The story in itself has been created by Oda. Seemingly, as we're going to go on to a few things, it could potentially have not even happened yet, the events that were in Film Z.
So, pretty much, Film Z came out in 2012. This is 7 years ago as of recording this. It is 2019 at the moment. Chapter 956 has dropped. Luffy is seemingly about to fight his first Yonko coming up. Stakes are high. At the point in time, a lot of people pointing to each other saying Luffy's commander level. There's questioning even amongst the community if he is in full position of being commander level. I feel like at this point in time it is definitively easy to say he is commander level. He has future sight. He has next
now
level
got
Rio.
second level armor.
He has gear 4. He is insanely strong. So why are we bringing up Film Z? Well, Film Z and the plot of Film Z is essentially Luffy and the Straw Hat Pirates fighting and essentially, for the most part, trying to defeat an admiral. Mm-hmm. And as we all know, an admiral is equal to, if not greater than, a Yonko commander. There is no disputing that. If you are using Marineford as a power scaling example, you have all the commanders fighting fairly equally with the admirals. A commander catching an admiral off guard causes an admiral to bleed. However, an admiral catching a commander off guard
is essentially a one-shot.
It is a defeat. It is the same thing that happened to Kaido bashing the shit out of Luffy.
Yeah.
And so, going back to Film Z and the plot of Film Z, right? Why? Why are we trying to say Film Z? What are we even trying to say about Film Z? Essentially, it's simple. Film Z takes place after Wano. It isn't something that might have been intended at the time of release for Film Z. Whether it is Oda retconning the idea that, I've put this content out here about an admiral level person. However, I think admirals are stronger than this now in the story. I'm going to have to rechange some of this so some of the facts in Z make more sense. Or if it was always intended to, that is debatable.
We know that Oda had planned Wano for a really, really long time. He's been very, very giddy about it. Wano's obviously based on Japan, and he lives in Japan. And this has basically been his favourite arc. He's most looking forward to arc. I wouldn't think it'd be very far-fetched to think that he planned out at least a lot of it, or the general scheme of it, for quite a long time. And I wouldn't be very far-fetched to say that he planned Sword to exist since back in 2012 when this film was released.
So, a very important thing to say here is there is a lot going against us that Film Z is set after Wano. For starters, Nami's climate attack, Zoro's swords, just general theme and aesthetic of the movie.
And here's one thing that's definitely you can just overlook, is the fact that they're obviously not going to spoil new weapons. If they're going to have something that shows up years and years and years later in the show, they're not going to just have the person have ridiculously powerful weapons that are completely updated, because that just spoils all of the progression in the show. Obviously, the movie that we're not claiming is entirely 100% canon, in that all of the weapons are the exact same, all of the battle scars that all of the characters have are the exact same, maybe even all of the characters in the crew aren't necessarily the exact same. However, Zephyr as a character has been name-dropped in the actual series.
Not yet, but surmising to stay, I feel like...
In the anime series.
Yes.
They have had plank... In like a...
Tie-in
basically like a filler that would tie it into the movie. They had show of a Neo Marine.
So, essentially, there is a lot of stuff saying that it isn't canon. It is not a canon movie. And there are a lot of things going against it that it is after Wano. But there are some things going for it that it is set after Wano. And one of these things, whether retconned or not, is quite simply the display of armament haki throughout the movie. As you can see on screen, on the left-hand side, is Luffy activating Gear 2 in Film Z.
Now, one thing we'd like to say is haki in general was used very reservedly in this movie. However, the haki that was shown was ridiculously powerful. Like, the haki that was actually shown, I don't think we have an image of this, but there was Luffy using Conqueror's haki, and he essentially used a self-contained pulse that he seemingly controlled with very good ease, that specifically knocked out every single Marine other than one, and left him just fatigued enough that he couldn't do anything as Luffy questioned him.
Something we have only ever seen in the series, in a non-canon movie as well, being Stampede, shown by Luffy and Bullet. They are the only two people to show haki in this sort of bubble aura that comes out of them and specifically radiates in a certain way. Now, going back to the armament haki here, on the right-hand side is the title cut card in Wano currently, and it is essentially showing what Rio is currently in Wano. It is a bit of a spoiler.
So this is how Rio is animated in Wano.
So if you notice, top to bottom, it is a normal fist. These sort of glowing veins start pulsing from the fist. Now, in the Wano version, his armament haki is up. It goes black clad. In the movie version, it doesn't. You can just say that is Luffy activating Gear 2. That is perfectly fine. However, there is also the possibility that it was a foreshadowing teaser of Ryu armament haki. Or, potentially even the next stage of Rio armament haki. For those of you that don't know, in the manga at the moment, whenever Old Man Hyo uses armament haki, or Rio specifically, he actually coats his arm black and then does the pulse, or then armament haki something up. However, we've seen people not armament haki up their arm, but armament haki up an object. A prime example of this is Rayleigh. Rayleigh has been shown armament hakiing up seemingly random sticks without making his hand black clad first. Whereas people like Zoro have to armament haki up their hand and then spew it out of their hand to armament haki up something.
He's also been shown firing what seems to be like a beam-like drawing towards an animal that essentially pacifies the animal. Now, whether that is Conqueror's haki or armament haki, it's unknown. But regardless of what that was, when he did it, he did not armament haki his hand up.
It seemingly is Rio.
Yeah.
Pretty much Luffy says it's Rio, but
he essentially points his hands towards the thing itself. Whereas in every single aspect that we've seen, Conqueror's haki, it is literally just an outward aura. So Rayleigh, especially having really good perception haki, wouldn't even necessarily have to turn around to look at the animal, let alone put his hand towards the animal, unless he actually had to use his hand to project something out at the animal.
I feel like it's all but confirmed that scene is Rayleigh using Rio.
Yeah.
Spewing haki out his arm to damage the elephant, essentially making the elephant pacified. So, okay, there's arm haki. That's a bit of a reach, right? It is a bit of a hard thing to prove, even though it does look stylistically identical.
Yes.
What else is there? Well, quite simply, future sight.
Yeah. So this has been shown very, very often. It's been shown a lot in the Katakuri fight, obviously, because we know, and they've stated multiple times, that Katakuri is using future sight.
And since then, in Wano, Luffy is confirmed using future sight. And we have seen him using future sight.
Absolutely undeniably. He literally tells someone what is about to happen and tells them how to move to get out of the way of it.
So, okay. Future sight is displayed with a red hue coming from the eyes and dragging behind where the person's eyes have been.
And this has been shown multiple times.
And so, what's the point of this? 7 years ago, this was shown in a One Piece movie, Film Z.
More than once.
And it was the first time that this effect had ever been used in the anime or in a non-anime related setting. It is the first time that observation haki had been shown this way.
So we urge you to go back and rewatch Film Z, at least these fight scenes, these couple fight scenes. So if you see, look at the bottom left photo, the bottom left photo, you have Luffy dodging, right? Essentially, so he's using future sight and he's dodging projectiles. Then at the bottom right, he's doing the exact same thing. He's looking. He's got his eyes open. He's not dodging a projectile in that scene. However, there is a scene in the movie where he dodges multiple cannonballs, which right after having that red gleam come from his eye.
To the point where, while he's got the red gleam in his eyes, he's able to deflect a cannonball without using armament haki.
With his bare hand.
So, essentially, from what we know, he has Rio in this movie, he has future sight in this movie. You can try and argue against it, and that is perfectly fine. However, the next little bit of stuff going forward in this movie, you can't really deny is something that was strictly shown for the sole intent of being the reveal of it since the post-time skip. Considering this is the first content movie-wise after the time skip. It is also the introduction of one of the most major points in the entire series. Wrong one there. That's Zev.
Yep.
Using future sight as
well.
So
that's Zeph in the movie Z using future sight the exact same way that Luffy did it. So Luffy had that red gleam against Zeph, and then Zeph had that gleam against him back.
This scene is also directly taken from Zeph fighting Kizaru right at the end of the movie. And Admiral using future sight, I feel like we have established this in Marineford. You had Aokiji dodging Whitebeard. You had Akainu dodging two commanders.
You had people seemingly taking a blade straight to the chest that was haki imbued and then doing no damage simply because they parted in the middle right before the blade went through. Very, very, very similar, or the exact same as what Katakuri did, and which is why everybody thought he was a Logia at the start.
So, before I screwed up the panels, sorry guys, the next thing is the big reveal that happened in this movie, and that is the state of the Admirals.
Yep. So this was not released before this. However, it has been confirmed post this. So this was essentially a thing that was undeniably true and canon that is in the movie. Even though the movie itself isn't canon, this specific thing is canon. These injuries are canon.
So although we don't see Akainu's injuries, the Aokiji injuries haven't shown up in the canon story, but we know they are canon.
Yeah. And
these injuries are severe, right? So this is grounding the movie in reality, in time with the story. Whether it's Oda throwing in a few real details to mix in with the non-canon elements, that is up for debate. But quite seemingly, it is part of the story. So, okay, what does this have to do with Sword, right? And seemingly, it is very interesting that in a movie that we are claiming introduces Sword, they also have the first on-screen appearance of Aokiji post time skip.
Yeah.
Someone that a lot of people are also theorizing is a member of Sword going undercover against a Yonko, Blackbeard, to be an informant for the Marines. The same MO that X-Drake has going undercover under Kaido to take down Kaido.
So if we assume that to be true, then so far we have 2 of the 4 Yonko being essentially infiltrated by this Sword agency.
Now, separate to that, there is no need to infiltrate Big Mum's crew for the sense that you've got CP0 members there. But that being said, we've been told that Big Mum only trusts her bloodline. Unless you become family with her, there is no allegiance to her.
The best that you're going to hope to get is something like Peckham's, where you're literally just an errand boy.
Whereas with Shanks, it's even more tight-knit than that, where it seemingly Shanks headhunts you. You don't go searching to join Shanks.
If you try and go searching to join Shanks, he'll either fight you or drink with you and then kick you off the island.
So, seemingly, the goal of Sword, again, reaffirming this, is to take down the Yonko. Aokiji, being a member of Sword, very likely to be a member of Sword to take down Blackbeard. So, okay, what does this have to do with the injuries? Well, Aokiji's injuries on Akainu have completely removed his sword tattoo.
Mm-hmm.
So, since Akainu has become Fleet Admiral, he no longer has his sword tattoo.
Because his right shoulder, where the sword tattoo was, is now iced or ice-burned.
Ice-burnt? So
damaged in some way.
Okay, so what? His tattoo is gone. Well, seemingly, if you could infer that Aokiji had a tattoo of Sword as well, that could have been what's burnt off. Or, you could also surmise that if Akainu was the leader of Sword pre-time skip, when he had his duel with Aokiji, the story spun to the world was that Akainu took leniency on Aokiji after their duel, after he won, and let him live. Seemingly something that goes against Akainu's roughness and gruffness of just pure fighting to the death, right? But then again, we're talking about Marines here, we're talking about comrades that have been fighting alongside each other for decades. But, that being said, if Sword is a top secret government organisation, and again, I'll talk about someone that could also be linked to this in a second, if Akainu is a leader, him rising to the rank of Fleet Admiral, that would essentially fulfill his workforce, essentially, to be able to go against the Gorosei without it directly being affiliated with him anymore. Right? And so, if you have someone like Aokiji, a powerful asset, who is in the situation of potentially leaving the Marines or you just having a conflict with them, this is an opportune time to present to them a joining hand in joining Sword. Whether Aokiji was a member before or only became a member after the duel, that is up for debate. However, there is a very good likelihood that Akainu passed out the hand of friendship to Aokiji in the hopes that he would go deep undercover. Someone very, very, very trusted. To be an admiral is to be very, very, very trusted. And seemingly the goal of Sword, like we have said hundreds of times in this video, is to take down the Yonko. So having Aokiji be an informant for Akainu seemingly makes perfect sense to most people. So, okay, what else? What else does this movie have related to Sword?
So, what is Sword's major plan? Why do they think that they can take down Yonko? Why do they think that they are powerful enough to take down Yonko? Knowing that that there are 4 of them, and that Yonko are essentially like Admiral level or above.
And what does this link back to everything else we've been talking about throughout the video?
So, we've been talking previously about the Warlords. Now, earlier on in the series, all the way back, far, far long ago, the Straw Hats very heavily struggled against a certain thing that it took basically the biggest hit from all 3 of the 3 monsters in the Straw Hat crew to defeat, and that was the early tier Pacifista. So that was the first version of the Pacifista that was actually remarkably strong. Now, nowadays, once you've got Haki and once you have Perception Haki and all those different things, you can beat one fairly easily, so they're not necessarily able to touch the Yonko, right? They were created as sort of like the noob stompers, right? So they were probably most effective in the very early New World and in the Grand Line, where virtually no pirate could actually beat one, at least in a one-on-one, or even as a weak crew, even with your entire crew. So realistically, they are basically just death machines that will hunt down pirates and whack them all out. However, right now, they're just noob stompers. But the Marines, even if they can stomp, even if it's super effective and they can stop every single one
of the top tier pirates after that.
Yeah, or of the new pirates, meaning that there's no more top tier pirates, they still have to think about the now. They still have to deal with the current Yonko, because they still have decades to live. So what are they going to do to take down the actual Yonko?
And how does this link back to the rest of the stuff we're talking about? Well, quite frankly, it's just going to be plain and simple. The weapons that the CP0 were in Wano 4 and trying to collect is essentially being linked through Kong as a distributor to the Secret Science Division of the world government, the SSG. I'm just going to straight up now try and predict what this thing's called. The Secret Science Division Grand Line, considering just like G1 through to 10, we have the G representing the Grand Line branches, Science Division Grand Line. I feel like that is where Vegapunk is. I feel like the weapons that CP0 are getting on behalf of the Celestial Dragons, all these weapons and that, is essentially on behalf of Kong, so Kong can redistribute it to the Science Division, so the Science Division can enhance these things to seemingly, and drumroll please, show what we learnt in film Z, the new pacifistas.
So, these are the new pacifistas, quote unquote. However, this movie, again, was released back in, 2012?
2012, 7 years ago, and what is that on the pacifista's chest?
Well, that seems like an upside-down marine symbol with a sword going through it.
So, what do we think this means? Well, quite frankly, the same thing that we were talking about at the beginning of the chapter. Since the warlords have been abolished, right? And Fujitora has seemingly told us that there is something that is going to replace the warlords.
It is very well known that more than likely it will be an upgraded version of the pacifista, since that has been hinted at for quite a while now.
And this essentially more than just confirms it, but essentially tells us what the upgrades will be to an extent.
So essentially what we're looking at here in this image is we're looking at what the new pacifista will be, going by our theory that the film Z, if it were canon, would be post-Wano, post the takedown of whoever goes down in this arc. Once Luffy is essentially Admiral level, so near Yonko level, so say he teams up with Kid or he teams up with somebody else and takes down Kaido, but in order to get to that level, he would have to be quite strong, say near Admiral level, therefore fighting someone who is an Admiral or was an Admiral.
In the form of Zeth. So this is, I feel like this is cut and clear. You have the marine symbol on the right, you have what we are just going to straight up say is confirmed, the sword symbol on the left, and the fact that sword is a secret marine, a secret marine organization meant to infiltrate and take down the pirates. Yonko being pirates, warlords being pirates. The warlords being abolished at the moment are most likely being replaced by these guys. What would be impressive though as an upgrade for these guys? Well,
now,
like we were saying before.
Yeah, let's just mention that this logo that we see on the new pacifistas is a sword going through the upside-down marine logo. There is nothing else to it. It literally is a sword going through the upside-down marine logo.
You can't get more clean-cut than sword marine.
Exactly. There's nothing, an underground marine, upside-down marine, right? The hidden version of the marines. So it is, this logo, by the way, was not mentioned at all whatsoever in the movie. No one referenced it to anyone. No one said anything like, oh, that's your logo, that's your flag, anything like that. This was simply a hint. This was just a little subtle hint of...
This is what's to come.
Yeah, you look at it, you just don't even really think about it. You just look at it and you go, oh, well,
I know a lot of people out there have already theorized that the pacifistas, the upgraded pacifistas at least, would be the things that would be replacing the warlords. However, straight up, no one has actually linked that to sword. And going past that, not just sword, but it is secret government tech, the secret science Grand Line branch. The weapons and upgrades for these pacifistas coming from Wano, coming from the underground deals. Whether these pacifistas are equipped with sea stone or have sea stone guns, sea stone hands, there are so many possibilities. But the fact, even separate to sea stone and that, it could be something as simple as Vegapunk using the lineage factor that we know he worked on with Judge Finsmoke to manipulate these things to be even stronger, plus have these weapons.
So their quote-unquote skin could be iron skin, the same way that all the people in Sanji's family have iron skin that is essentially bulletproof.
Now, add that with the pacifistas that we saw pre-time skip that had Kizaru's laser, plus add sea stone weapons on top of that.
Potentially the integration of more fruit powers.
And an army of these things, that quite easily is enough to replace the warlord system. Instead of having 7 decent fighters, you have an army that you can build of people that not only can do an admiral level attack, have a defense of a wind smoke, but also have the ability to cancel anyone's devil fruit if they touch them. It is quite simply the pacifistas.
Yeah. Now let's talk about how strong these pacifistas could potentially be. So they're showing in the movie, well, they really weren't shown that much, which is very strange, right? Because they weren't a very high point in the movie. They were simply just men that was going along with the Marines. Seemingly, they could have just not been in the movie, and it wouldn't have made too much of a difference plot-wise, right? So essentially, what they were just a powerful force that scared the Straw Hats quite a bit until Frankie eventually defeated them. Now, you hear that and you think, well, they can't be that strong, right? Frankie did defeat them. Now, here's the thing, right? Let's assume this is post Wano Frankie. So he's a lot stronger than he is currently,
Not
right?
just that, he went into Wano, specifically saying to Luffy before Wano, let me help you make a weapon that'll take down Kaido. And since then, he has done nothing on screen to have achieved this.
Which means he's likely hiding a really strong weapon. Now, the attack that he did to destroy these. Now, before he did this attack, it was literally nothing but all of the Straw Hats, outside of the 3 monsters who were currently fighting in a different location, all of the Straw Hats, so this is Brook included, this is some of the fighters, they're not the monster trio, but there's some pretty good fighters in there. They were basically just scared of these things. They didn't even really try to fight them. They were basically just immediately on the back foot as soon as they saw them, and they just looked at them and said, they're scary, they're strong, oh no.
The only person that dealt with them in any way, shape or form was Frankie. The person that we know spent 2 years at Vegapunk's lab. If anyone was going to have a chance to take down one of Vegapunk's new inventions, the new upgraded pacifistas,
it's the one who studied him.
And so, not just studied him, the Shogun Frankie clashed against these things.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't seem like it was doing well, and this was only a brief showing of these pacifistas, but it was seemingly kind of just boxing with them somewhat evenly. Mm-hmm. The thing that genuinely put a dent in these things
was when Frankie came out of the belly of his General Frankie robot, put his hands together, and used what is a high tier, not just a normal, but a high tier Admiral attack, Kizaru's massive laser.
The Yamasaki no Sacred Jewel.
So this is essentially Kizaru's version of the Kamehameha, right? It's not just a single laser, it's a massive beam that fires a consistent amount of times.
It was all the hundreds of little lasers, tight-knit, just Gatling gunning essentially all these pacifistas down.
And the explosion that it made was like a crater. It was just this massive nuke that just devastated everything near it. There's nothing short of like a Yonko that I could see just taking that in the face and just standing back up. Like, and the amount of damage that did to the environment, you would have to have someone with so much durability that you would actually accept that they could take an unreasonable amount of punishment. Someone like Big Mom who can just like take anything and just stand back up.
So, okay, now we've theorized that Akainu was a leader of Sword. He's recruited Aokiji. Other members of Sword are seemingly Yamakiji, Momonga, Onigumo, these vice admirals that appeared in Film Z. The reason why I am saying that they are part of Sword is quite frankly because these Sword-shown pacifistas were being led by these people under the orders of new Fleet Admiral Akainu, who, at the time, if he was just ordering them as the Fleet Admiral, they would have been showing up just as Marines. However, a big point about this movie and the theme of this movie was Zed, a former admiral who had left the Marines, had the goal to take down all pirates in the world, right? Essentially, he represents Sword as well, right? And so these members of Sword are all his former students. These people that would be picking up the mantle of pirates are evil, pirates are bad, we must do everything we can to defeat all pirates, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kobe included there. He's not a student directly of Zeph, but he's got the mindset of pirates can be very terrible. They can do bad things.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the way he lived under Alvida. I know she's only a mediocre pirate, if that, but just the trauma she kind of instills on him is insane. So, okay, because Akainu ordered these people and they came across in this movie essentially as a representative of Sword, and not of just the base Marines because the pacifistas showed up. That is why I believe these Vice Admirals are essentially members of Sword. But okay, what does that mean? Why did he send Sword specifically to take on Zeph? To take on former Black Arms Zephyr? Well, that is because, quite frankly, the way this movie goes and it is implied, Zeph shares the same goals as Sword. But maybe more than just shares the same goals as Sword, maybe was a former member of Sword non-canonly. The fact that we've got the Neo Marines symbol being the exact same as Sword's symbol,
essentially with just a face placed on top of it.
Whether that's Z's face or even more importantly tying in with Z's backstory, right? It is essentially the same symbol.
So essentially what happens here, right, is imagining the symbol that's on the new pacifista's chest right now was the original Sword logo that potentially Zeph and whoever else founded Sword came up with. Right?
Whether that was canon or non-canon, or he was a member canonly or non-canonly.
Yeah. So regardless of that, that is essentially the Sword logo, right? Then on the left, once Zeph left Sword, once he left the Marines, he took the exact same logo because he still shares the exact same goal. He just put basically his face on it.
So
my version of Sword.
So this essentially ties in more so, really, to the theme of what we believe that the Sword initiative is, and that's to take down the pirates, because that is Zeph's goal throughout the whole movie. And essentially, looking at it as an internal struggle, you have a member of Sword, this secret Marine organization, defecting and going against the orders of Sword, being dealt with by Sword members. It's an internal struggle being kept internally with the Straw Hats just along for the ride. Again, this is 7 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
This is before Dressrosa. This is essentially ages ago. And Oda's had this in mind and had this in place all the way back then. And so, going forward with all this, right, just to hit the hammer home is how it stays relevant to this chapter even more so outside of Sword is the abolishment of the warlords, which the reason Zeph left the Marines is because the warlord that cut off his arm became a warlord when he left.
Mm-hmm.
He left because they gave him a position of the warlord status. The only warlords this could have been is Buggy, Law, or Weevil. Buggy's not touching an admiral. Law's not touching an admiral. Weevil has been stated from Kizaru to be fearsome and like a young Whitebeard. The only person out of these three that we could contend with an admiral.
So to speak to Weevil's potential strength, basically, is he's been stated as a young Whitebeard. Now, whether that is a prime Whitebeard or a slightly before prime Whitebeard, it's basically someone who has the Quake fruit and someone who is incredibly gifted enough to be on rocks, the same crew as a young Big Mom who at the age of 5 destroyed an entire giant village. And Kaido, who was a absolute bloody monster.
Currently the highest bountied Yonko, full stop.
Mm-hmm.
And not just that, right? If we take this an extra step further and we actually look at the Neo Marines symbol, it doesn't just represent Sword, the allegiance that he left, and the ideology that Zeph carries.
No.
It also represents
his
rebellion, his grudge.
Yeah.
The face essentially makes it a mustache.
So have a look at where the face is placed, right? So you see that essentially what the Sword logo is it's a marine symbol flipped upside down with a sword through it. Now, if you look at the exact same thing, it is the exact same way. It is a marine symbol flipped upside down with a sword through it and a face placed on top. Now, what's very significant about that is where you see the face placed, where those two tails that come out of the sides of the marine logo is, they're essentially coming out of above his lip, right? So in between his nose and his teeth, where your mustache is. So essentially, those two flicks are coming out of the side of his mustache, almost implying that those two flicks are a big white mustache. Now, again, if you look at Whitebeard's apparent son and Whitebeard himself, the big white flicks coming out of the side of his mustache, that face is essentially the face of Edward Weevil. So that logo is essentially symbolizing his grudge against Edward Weevil. That is Edward Weevil's face with a sword through its head. That's what that logo is.
Now, it is very, very, very poignant to say that this movie introduced Aokiji, the first appearance post time skip. It introduced the concept of sword and its members, and not just that, this movie represents the goal of sword, and also included a backstory relevant to the warlords in the chapter when they all became relevant, when you get a warlord abolishment in the same chapter that you get the introduction of sword, in the same chapter that all this becomes relevant again. It is just super impressive how Oda has specifically tied all these themes from that movie, again, back in with one chapter, and how one chapter can very much so change everything that you thought you already knew about certain things. Pretty much going back over the highlights of this theory is that CP0, right, gets weapons from Wano.
Mm-hmm.
Wano gives CP0 the weapons, redistributes it to Vegapunk in the Secret Science Grand Line Division, SSG, as of chapter 957, the Secret Science Grand Line Division.
Vegapunk then takes those weapons/materials, because they mentioned weapons and armor, and this armor could literally just be steel plating that they could just use in any sense to reinforce the pacifistas.
These pacifistas are then used to replace the warlords
and take down all 4 Yonko in one massive, wide-range, army-level coup that is essentially Order 66, but One Piece version.
To see whether or not this will be successful or not is completely up to question. However, it is almost undeniable with the evidence put forward that Luffy has Rio in this movie. Luffy has Future Sight in this movie. Luffy is fighting an admiral in this movie. This movie introduces the thoughts of an undercover operative in that of Aokiji. Aokiji specifically says when asked about his duel with Akainu, I got a little hectic and paid the price. I can't really talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Now that's very, very ominous. Saying it got a little hectic and I paid the price, that isn't as simple as I wanted to be the fleet admiral, so we decided to fight over it, and then I got injured, right? And in the other sense as well, it's been stated that Akainu, quote-unquote, spared Aokiji. It wasn't just like a brotherly fight where they fought over possession. It was a mercy. So that would carry with it the expectation that whoever loses gets killed. It's not like it was a fight on everything, it was a fight to the death. But, you know... They
call it a duel, but a duel to the death.
Exactly. But it wasn't necessarily just like a duel as in fight as though you want to kill them because otherwise you're not going to win. It was a duel in sense of like, even if you beat them up and they submit, you're still expected to kill them. That was the expectation, is that whoever loses dies. Yet, Akainu spared him purely out of mercy. So that essentially tells you that it was expected that whoever lost died, regardless of even if they could have survived and gotten medical attention and stayed in the Navy.
And so with that, who better to be used to infiltrate another organisation such as the Blackbeard Pirates that are trying to grow in power than someone that you can turn around and say is, oh, I have a grudge against the world government because they didn't want to follow my ideology and I got beaten and I got my leg ripped off, burnt off, my shoulder burnt, all in a massive plot to take down one of the emperors. The same way that X-Drake 2 years ago left the Marines, infiltrated the Beast Pirates to take down the Beast Pirates. And it is also very important that these people all somewhat have the ideology of essentially protecting people as well. The best way to protect people is to remove the problem. Akainu, being the type of person that is a go-getter moving the Marine headquarters to the New World, is because he wanted to send a statement to the pirates of the New World that you alone are not safe because you are there. We are actively coming to get you. That is seemingly even more so now that we've got multiple operatives entering multiple Yonko crews with the goal to take them down. And I feel like it is all but confirmed that coming up, we will get the reveal of these sword-led pacifistas with sea stone weapons and reinforcement to either, if it's used to take down the current warlords, or if it's used instead of that just as a fighting force going forward in the event of a Yonko's attack, or just on the offensive trying to take down a Yonko in an army situation. We're talking about the secret weapon. This is the secret weapon used to replace the warlords.
Yep.
And going forward, when you think about it, there's something that the Marines need. They need to be upgraded in some sense. Yes, they have some top tier people and they have a lot of numbers in that, but realistically at the moment, especially with the way things are going in the current story, they need something extra to make them fear a threat again.
Although they absolutely dominated in the Marine-Ford War, they were genuinely scared that they were going to lose against the Whitebeard pirates and his allies. They were genuinely fearful that they may potentially lose. They specifically called for absolutely all hands on deck, as long as it isn't complete abandoning of their posts. They called for absolutely all hands on deck, including all of the warlords, and it was a very strict order. It was, if you don't come, we will hunt you and kill you. The warlords must attend.
Or you are extradited from a warlord like Jinbei.
Mm-hmm.
You, essentially, they prepared, whether or not they thought it was how Whitebeard was currently, or Prime Whitebeard, they prepared for the world's strongest.
Yeah.
They got the world's strongest, and they barely survived. Any other Yonko coming after that, you can make the argument that they could have kept going, or they might have lost this, that, or the other. That is beside the point. They were expecting to have a war that continued on for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't necessarily believe the war was going to end when it did. And even so with that, the war ended with Whitebeard, Blackbeard, and Shanks all present at Marineford on the verge of fighting. So that being said, these things that are going forward in the story as well, with Big Mom and Kaido teamed up, the Luffy alliance, everything with the Revs, there are so many big players. The Marines need to bolster their forces considerably. The best way to do that would to be able to make the pacifistas relevant and fearful again for higher tier people, to actually have them be a genuine threat. And not just that, have genuine threats of good, strong people as well coming forward with that. The idea that no one is safe from a pacifista, no matter their tier, if they have Sea Prism Stone, makes them a genuine threat. It doesn't matter if you can beat them in a fight. If you get careless and get your powers deactivated, it is essentially a death sentence.
Mm-hmm. It's very rare that Yonko will generally fight actual, like, random peasant people. Like, Big Mom was not going to go out herself and meet Luffy when he invaded her territory. She sent Cracker, a 3rd Division commander. The 3rd of her 4 division commanders. And that was only because the 4th was a scrub who'd just been beaten. So, essentially, she sent her lowest person who she considered competent, because she's so much above everybody else that anyone below him she probably doesn't even think is, like, worth anything. She sent basically the weakest person that she would ever really send for anything over to deal with this guy. She didn't even close to come by herself, right? However, these pacifists are essentially going to make it so that it's going to take the Yonko to fight them off. Like, we're not saying that these new pacifistas are likely going to be strong enough to just straight up gang up and take down a Yonko.
Or even to the point where they're going to be able to beat a 1st Division commander or something like that, or pose a massive threat.
But it's pretty significant that they can wipe out virtually all of the fodder. And basically, I'm going to say anyone from probably, like, top tier Vice Admiral, so like Momonga, like named Vice Admiral level and above, only those people and above can probably beat one of these new pacifistas. I'm going to say some random Vice Admiral could have a really, really tough time fighting one of these pacifistas. And if you consider that fact, then anyone, say like Oven and Daifuku, maybe 3 pacifistas, could probably take them out, right? So if you have a massive army of them invading each Yonko, one territory at a time, just cleaning through people, all you'll need is like, say, 2 admirals and a few like good named Vice Admirals to take out the commanders in the Yonko, and then you've essentially just wiped out everyone.
And this essentially comes even more into fruition when you take in the idea that in this chapter as well, it kind of made it sound like the Marines weren't going to go to Wano just like Drake and Kobe planned. Why would that be a good thing if it was part of the plan? Well, because the more Marines there, the more casualties there are possibly. The best thing could be for these undercover operatives, apart from if they get the opportunity to take down their Yonko on their own, is essentially going, they're at a weak point, send in the new pacifistas that will finish them off.
Mm-hmm.
It is an Order 66.
Mm-hmm.
It is a definitive finisher move. It is these new, stronger, better larger than life monsters.
They will essentially have all the information they need because they've infiltrated them. They don't have to rely on the CP agencies because obviously they're an underground organization, right? And one of the major struggles of being absolutely invisible is the fact that you can't rely on anyone else because you can't be seen. So I don't think SWORD can necessarily go around asking for CP information. They're only really privy to the information that they receive as a general information stream that the CP0 most likely just kind of give to the Navy nonchalantly. I think it'd be very suspicious if they asked for specific information about someone because the CP agencies would simply say, well, what are you going to do with this information? And then they're busted, right? Because what they're doing with the information is a secret from the CP agencies. So essentially, they need to get their own source of information that they're not already getting. So they're sending in these people that are basically underground to get that information. Let's say you want to take down Kaido's crew. You wait until Jack does something like goes out to Zoe. Let's say you have all of your pacifistas already ready. You wait until Jack goes out to Zoe. Now you know that one of the calamities, one of the 3 strongest underlings in the entire crew, and all of the people that are with him are away. You can send a separate ship, a strike force, similar to what they actually did send after Jack, in order to take him out.
Well, technically, Jack went after them, transformed Doflamingo, but he got taken out.
Exactly,
like
yeah.
a hit strike.
So you could basically do that, like what I was more talking about, the strength of the people on the crew. So you could send a ship like that with the people that were on that crew after Jack, and then send in a couple admirals, say 2 admirals, a few of the named vice admirals at the top, the ones that regularly get screen time, and then a small army of the new pacifistas, and you've essentially just wiped out everybody in the entire Big Mom's crews. You just take it one island at a time. They'll sense you coming, but they won't be able to do anything. Like, you'll have the entire army, the entire of Totland surrounded by ships that just have new pacifista on them. They can't retreat anywhere, and Big Mom sure as hell isn't going to retreat because she's too stubborn.
Especially if they can somewhat cycle between Kizaru's laser attack and Seastone bullets.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're defending against if you do get the chance to be on guard. You have to evade, not block.
Yeah.
Which seemingly is even harder, puts you more at risk.
Because there's multiple of them. So, like, you know, there's one person that we know of on Big Mom's crew, for example, that has Future Sight. You can assume that Big Mom has it, but the only person that we actually know on that crew that has it is Katakuri, and that's his main staple thing. So I would say that Smoothie probably doesn't have it, since it's Katakuri's main staple thing.
Even Big Mom doesn't seem like she has it in terms of at the wedding. She asked Katakuri what was going on.
Exactly.
She didn't even look into the future. So seemingly it is something very unique to Katakuri, Luffy, the admirals, potentially a few other people. Someone like Z if he is non-canon. However, again, like I was saying, I feel like if this is all true, Z will get a name drop when we do get led to Vegapunk, even if it is the same way that Shiki got a name drop on the Rocks Pirates in the canon story.
Exactly, and that's another good thing to bring up, is that we had a movie about Shiki. Shiki wasn't canon, and he's had a name drop. But he's not a canon character in the sense of what happened in the Shiki story. But however, he has been canonized by very small clips of, like, tiny bits of information that has been dropped in canon. So some of these people, some of these events did happen. I think the distinction between canon and non-canon isn't necessarily that you need to be aware that literally none of it ever happened. It's more of a distinction of they can change certain things, and the movie takes certain liberties in order to be more entertaining that aren't necessarily prevalent.
The movie itself might not be canon, but the themes and the character are. They're written by Oda under the intention that this is a character that I made.
Think about that film where all the Straw Hats got guns. Was it Film Gold? Where they all had guns?
Strongworld. It was Strongworld.
Strongworld? So in Strongworld, all of them had guns. It is a very specific thing that Sanji doesn't use weapons in his hands. He uses knives to cut and cook. He does not use knives to fight people. He doesn't use his hands for combat because he doesn't want to dirty his hands or damage his hands, because he uses his hands to cook. So he only uses his legs. That's his whole thing. However, he's got a gun, doesn't he? He's firing a gun in that movie. That's obviously not canon. However, a lot of the fights that happen could be, as far as we know, canon.
How strong they would be if they were to fight in a canon sense.
Exactly. And the thing is, as well, is it's not necessarily time-based, right? So we can only assume that the new movie coming out that has Bullet in it is going to be post-Wano, obviously, because it has people like Kid in it. It wouldn't really make sense for them to be well acquainted afterwards.
Or seemingly pre-post Wano, because the 1.5 bill being in it, because we don't know whether or not Luffy's going to get a bounty increase after Wano.
Yeah.
But presumably, right, with what we know in the story, Luffy in that movie uses Rio, it uses Future Sight, is showing the next level Conqueror's Haki used in Film Z as well. He's using the same things that he used in Film Z in that movie against Bullet. Someone in that context who is the closest person to achieving One Piece, the closest person to achieving Pirate King level. Someone, again, somewhat surpassing an Admiral, really, but on that same tier, and he's showing it the same way, the same things.
So yeah, there's just a lot. There's a lot to unpack in the theory, and it's long, and there's lots of different angles, and there's probably lots of tiny little things that you can think of to
Disprove
dissuade
things.
But however, I wanna just make one thing clear. There's this thing called the Nirvana fallacy. I talk about it a lot, where essentially it's that if there's one fault in a thing, there's one fault in the system. It's when you claim that because of this one fault, it means that none of it works. It means that none of it should happen. So people use it a lot with things like, going real political, capitalism. People say there is these really small faults in it, therefore it's completely terrible and we should abolish it entirely. Everything has faults. Every time you suggest a new system for anything in general, it'll have faults. Anytime there's a new theory that comes out, no one's going to get every single word that they say 100% correct. There are always like tiny little things that is going to go wrong, but the general overarching theory you can work around, especially if you're a little bit lenient to the facts. If you can pick one tiny thing that may very slightly disprove one notion, just think to yourself, but does that disprove the entire notion? Think to yourself, what does that actually disprove? Because it doesn't actually disprove
For the amount of stuff that is non-canon and disprovable very easily, like Nami's climate tank, like Zoro's swords,
Exactly.
there are just as many things that you can turn around and say, well, definitively, the pacifistas have a new symbol of them that is not the normal Navy symbol.
Yeah.
It is seemingly a symbol with a sword. The only organization we know within the Marines to have something to do with a sword is sword.
Yeah.
There are other things that are more important that outweigh the inconsistencies to say this is important. Like the fact that Z has a sword symbol with his face on top of it. His version, his Neo-Marine version of sword, going out and taking the pirates on directly instead of infiltrating. Anyway, we hope you enjoyed the theory.
Yeah.
We hope that you've taken away at least some of this. We hope that you at least have considered the notion now that the pacifistas will be in the main fighting force of Sword, the members of Sword potentially, the fate of Sabo and Vivi and
Sword's
Cobra.
most likely goal. Quite a few of the members that are like fairly considerably confirmed to be in Sword,
and essentially the fighting force of some of these people going forward, and how this has major ripple effects throughout the entire world of One Piece, especially if we see one of these pacifistas take down one of the warlords. This essentially is laying the pathway for One Piece to come, and as we know at the moment, One Piece is essentially in the end game. It's the throne wars.
Yep.
Enjoy.